Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is the Darklight Emissary, and this video is going to go over the Star Gods, or the C'tan, which are basically the gods of the Necrons faction in Warhammer. So this faction is one of the oldest factions, older even than the Necrons, older than the Chaos Gods even. The C'tan are older than basically almost the universe. They are considered possibly some of the first intelligent beings that the universe ever created. Not only that, but the C'tan are basically living aspects of universal laws. So they are like an intrinsic part of just the universe in general. I should say the physical universe. They have zero presence in the warp. And just like the Chaos Gods are part of the fabric of the warp, the C'tan are like unto that for the Milky Way galaxy, as well as the universe at large. We don't know exactly how many C'tan there were. We do know there were quite a few originally, and we don't know how many there could be, in other parts of the universe. That's not ever really touched on, but imagine if they're one of the oldest species of being to exist in the universe. My speculation personally would be that there are more out there in the darkness and in other galaxies as well. Ultimately, any records of numbers that give any clue to the population of C'tan is in flux. There's not a known true canon answer, true lore answer to how populous the species really is, but we do have quite a few names listed out for C'tan that do exist. So the C'tan existed for a long time as basically ephemeral entities that spent a lot of time just being a parasite to stars, basically, and that's kind of where they get their name as Star Gods from the Necrons, or Necron before they became the Necrons, who discovered the C'tan. And, well, as far as we know, they were discovered by the Necrons first. And it's not known how the Necrons communicated with these entities, because these entities did not seem to pay attention to anything corporal before the Necrons. They seemed to just be content to, eat the energy from the stars, and they ignored any lesser energy types because it just didn't nourish them and it wasn't interesting to them. It was basically residual energy from planets. It wasn't enough for their appetites and for nourishing these entities. And they were enormous creatures. They would completely basically cover the surface of a star and just slowly eat it. They would take a few million years off of a star's life before moving on, typically, to a new star in a different system. And this endless existence of just kind of moving around and basically just living this kind of sedate life was changed by the Necrons, who had discovered a type of alloy that was living, a type of living metal that they called the necrodermis. And this living metal basically had just super robust regenerative properties, and the Necrons put it to good use for several different purposes. And one of these purposes they ended up using it for was to start giving the C'tan bodies. And once they were sheathed in these bodies of necrodermis metal, the C'tan's nature changed to where they actually did start desiring the energy from living beings over just the stars. Basically, they realized, being given new senses essentially by the bodies, that they were essentially eating basically the equivalents of a tasteless gruel with the stars, and that living creatures' essences just tasted better at the very simplest. So a lot of the Necron got devoured by C'tan over time, and then eventually when the Necron were turned into the Necrons, the C'tan glutted themselves upon the energy of their transference into the machine empire that we know them as, the Necrons now. This video is not about the Necrons. There is a separate video that I can put at the end of this video that is more about the Necrons, but basically what we need to know about the Necrons in this point is that the Catan used them to basically devour their energies, and also used them to eventually be an army for the Catan to help harvest more living beings' essence as well. And in recent years, the lore kind of has changed here a little bit. So originally, the Necron tier were turned into Necrons, and the Catan basically ruled them and controlled them at that point as soulless automatons. And to a large degree, a lot of the Necrons are soulless, but with recent changes to the lore in recent years, the Necrons were changed to where several of their greatest leaders can actually still think and have independent thought and actions. And these leaders eventually banded together to fight the Catan, because they realized that the Catan weren't really truly their allies. They were just as dangerous as like the warp was to a degree, and they were, all of them, extremely hostile and malevolent beings once they were basically made corporeal by the Necrons. And so eventually the Necrons had to defeat most of the ones that they knew, and they defeated them by breaking them to essentially sharded versions of themselves, and then trapping those shards into devices known as Tesseract cubes that the Necrons basically kept those bits of them trapped. And by shattering them into pieces, each of these shards, was still very powerful, but not nearly as powerful as a fully formed star god is. Basically, imagine if you were to somehow be able to go into the warp and, basically capture every greater demon of a chaos god. Essentially, you would do the same thing. You would, shard a chaos god into pieces and diminish its overall power, and it would become a bit more controllable by you. And so that is what the ultimate fate of a lot of Catan ended up being. They ended up being enslaved shards to the few remaining thinking Necrons, who went on to rule the rest of the Necrons best they could. And in the old lore, this wasn't the case. The Catan were simply went to sleep at the same time as the Necrons, and how they became shards, like, there wasn't this grand rebellion with the Necrons. If I recall in the old lore, it was some other way they got shattered into shards, I believe, in past lore. Someone can correct me on this. I don't exactly remember. I just remember that there was definitely not like this organized effort by thinking Necrons to rebel against their former allies and masters that the Catan were. Now, despite the Catan being completely of the material realm, they still have abilities that are beyond comprehension, just like warp entities tend to have abilities that can beyond comprehension as well. Magics that just do like really weird things like that. The Catan don't have any presence in the warp, as I previously mentioned, but what they do have is masteries over the physical realm that basically no other entities have. And so they're able to basically do what they want to do with physical properties. They can, basically, snap a finger and turn a tank into slag. They can send someone into alternate dimensions if they want to get rid of them. Elemental powers like fire and lightning, and just basically, if you think about some kind of physical trait of the universe, a Catan can mess with it. They can create singularities. They can, compress you with gravity. They can. One of the Catan is able to reshape entire worlds into images they like, and we'll talk about that Catan, and I'll list out the names of the ones we know of. But suffice it to say, these entities are the most powerful physical realm entities, not taking into account, how powerful warp entities are, and psychers and things like that, like the Emperor or something like that. However, The main weakness of the Catan is that the warp itself is a dangerous tool against the Catan. It is basically complete antimatter to them. And so if a Catan comes in contact with pure warp energy, it can run the danger of killing that Catan, or at least the shard of it that comes in contact with it. So the Catan were some of the original masterminds behind the Necron plot to try to seal off the warp completely from their physical realm so that they could feast on any remaining mortals in peace without any meddling from the warp and chaos and, the troubles that it brings to the physical realm. So the Necron plan to seal off the galaxy was not in any way, some altruistic, let's save the galaxy and our people type of thing. It was just a selfish ploy by the Catan to further be able to devour things at their leisure. So really, if you think about it, the original great rivalry between the warp and real space is really the Catan and the Chaos Gods, because they both represent the absolute literal opposites of each other in a lot of ways. It's just that the Catan really are not around in any appreciable numbers in the 40k era. They are all basically gone or missing or in other galaxies at this point. But if they either showed up in greater numbers or somehow broke free of the chains that the Necrons put them in, the Catan would be an interesting rival of some kind to Chaos. It would be interesting to see what they could do, because the Catan are still vulnerable to warp energy and warp powers. So it would be interesting to see how they would choose to try to fight the forces of Chaos and, try to enact that plan to seal off the galaxy again. So I'm going to go over a list of the Catan that we know that still exist, and just fair warning, I'm probably going to butcher some of these names because their actual names are basically Lovecraftian, old gods type of, unknowable type of names by human tongue type of thing. So, if you have a problem with how I pronounce these, then I guess I challenge you to do better than me on these ones. I don't claim to be some great pronouncer of every syllable of what I read. So, but anyway, here we go with some of these Catan here. Possibly the most well-known Catan is first, and his name is Azagorod the Nightbringer, or just the Nightbringer itself. This is possibly one of the most feared Catan of them all, both in the past and in current era. And the reason I say that is because he was just known for being especially cruel back when he was ruling as one of the Catan ruling over the Necrons. And this Catan was basically known as the Catan that represented death, darkness, and destruction as well. And to cap that all off, it was created or formed into a necrodermis form that looks like the Grim Reaper, which that is where the Grim Reaper form comes from in human iconography. And basically, the fear of death is caused by the trauma that the Nightbringer basically inflicted upon the galaxy when it was at large throughout the galaxy, to the point that most future species have some kind of echoed fear of this entity without even realizing it, just like humanity. You look at the Grim Reaper figure in human history, humans had no clue, it would have related to an ancient alien god, basically, right? This entity that's lived, longer than time itself, essentially, is why we were creating, endless depictions of the Grim Reaper. We're just oh, that's just death, and this entity basically literally put the fear of death into things. And ironically, in kind of a semi-humorous point, the orcs were the only ones that did not get this embedded fear, and it shows, right? The orcs do not really fear death. They don't care that much about it. So That's why they do not care about death, and everyone else tends to be a bit more self-preserving than the orcs. And as far as I know, unless, like, you want to incorporate the Lovecraftian old gods as maybe like H.P. Lovecraft having some kind of peering into the old Catan gods in some way and interpreting them as his old gods in his writings. We, like humanity at least, had no clue that the other Catan existed, but they didn't even know that, the Grim Reaper was, again, an entity like this, which is just fascinating to me. I think it's interesting that, entity could have so much influence over life that beings born millions of years later that, didn't even know that alien species existed for millennia. Like, we don't know if life exists in the rest of the galaxy right now. Yet, what if it being imprinted so hard upon our genetic code that we are writing artwork out that depicts an entity that we don't even know exists? That's just kind of fascinating for the Nightbringer specifically out of all the Catan. And then one of the other distinct things about the Nightbringer is that it was actually the very first of the Catan that was contacted by the Necron originally. And one has to wonder what motivated the Necron to continue making bodies for the Catan, because after the Nightbringer was put into his body of Necrodermis, he just started devouring Necron and almost made the species go extinct, or he would have if the Necron hadn't, literally persuaded him to stop. And I guess at this point it wasn't a sharded, enslaved piece by piece entity, and I'm sure the Nightbringer probably actually wanted more of his brethren to be put into those bodies. So perhaps it was kind of a press job at that point, because I don't see why the Necron would continue making it, bodies for the entities that are so destructive the moment that, they are given a new form to play with. But it's not really detailed as to why that would be the case, but that would be my theory on that. And along with just being super destructive and powerful, the Nightbringer apparently loves to be so sadistic and loves to torture so much and inflict suffering so much that apparently even the Dark Eldar don't come close to him on this. And that's saying something, considering, the Drukhari or Dark Eldar, it's down to a science for them to torture, they're definitely second on the list. If the Nightbringer's first, then the Drukhari are the second of beings you wouldn't want to run into. But anyway, Nightbringer, not one of the Catan you want to ever address or see in front of you, that's for sure. The Nightbringer became such a powerful and hated member of the Catan, to the point where it even started attacking other Catan and trying to eat them as well. And it's considered that, in theory, that it was either another Catan that convinced the Nightbringer to start eating other Catan, or it was the laughing god Kegrak of the Eldar pantheon that possibly convinced the Catan to start turning upon themselves and eating each other, because apparently to the Catan, not just the Nightbringer, but prominently him, the energies from other star gods was the greatest delicacy that they discovered of all of the types of life forces they came to love to devour. And then most distinctly, again, with the Nightbringer, and this will be the last thing about the Nightbringer, but the Nightbringer was basically, a shard of him was woken up in the 40k era by the Ultramarines on accident, and in a novel prominently named Nightbringer. And with the waking of this shard of the Catan, of the Nightbringer, this is what started reawakening the Necrons as well. So this was kind of a pivotal moment, not only for, a Catan to show back up, but also for the Necrons as a species to start coming back as well in the earlier parts of the 40k era. Now, possibly the other most well-known Catan is known as the Deceiver, or his full name being Mephitron, the Deceiver. And this Catan is very different from the Nightbringer in that, as kind of as straightforward as the Nightbringer really is, the Deceiver being labeled that is about as undirect as you can be. This Catan, while still relatively powerful in his own right, is considered one of the weakest as far as sheer power and might is concerned, and so he uses a prodigious charisma and other deceptive abilities to convince others to basically do his work for him. And so and interestingly enough, with the Deceiver, some of his feats of deceivery are sometimes confused with the laughing god of the Aldari pantheon. Like, they both are kind of two sides of the same coin in an odd way. Sometimes one is given the responsibility of the other in terms of who incited an incident of deceivery, because the laughing god is kind of a deceptive god as well. Just some interesting point there. And this is something I did not know, and I'll have to look up sources for this and kind of try to cross-reference this, but ironically, to that same point, it's possible that the laughing god and the Deceiver have both masqueraded around as each other. So you've got two capricious jokesters kind of running around as each other even at times, possibly, which is interesting. Didn't know that about these two, but often one is mistaken for the other in ancient stories, and just like how I mentioned earlier, both of them have been speculated to be the ones to deceive the Catan into devouring their siblings, basically. Now, with the capricious and sneaky nature of the Deceiver, it's my theory and a theory that this Catan, more than any other, has most shards that escaped enslavement by the Necrons, running around the galaxy doing whatever plots that the Deceiver wants to do, trying to one up the God of Change, Zench himself, in some ways. And one of the most interesting bits about the Deceiver comes from a Calidus assassin of the Imperium. So the thing about Calidus assassins is one of their favorite weapons is actually a Catan phase blade or phase knife. And a assassin was sent to assassinate a planetary governor named Tachys. And when she went to use the phase knife on him, it just passed straight through him. And so Catan blades basically pass through and destroy anything. And so for it to simply be absorbed means that, this governor was not actually human and basically devoured the blade as well as the assassin as well. And no other Catan are known to deceive in this way. So it's presumed that not only was it a Catan shard, but that this was the Deceiver, and that the Deceiver, for whatever reason, is posing as authority figures in the Imperium of Man for unknown reasons. So pretty much all of this information comes from 3 codexes of the Necrons themselves, 3rd edition, 5th edition, 8th edition. I really hope that some of this stuff is put in some novels, because I don't have the codexes for all of this stuff, but a lot of it sure sounds interesting to possibly expand upon later on, hopefully. The next Catan that we have is Magledroth, the Void Dragon. And so this is the 3rd most well-known. It possibly competes with the Deceiver for most well-known of the Catan other than the Nightbringer. And it is considered the most powerful of the Catan. And it's speculated, and I would say almost more than speculated, that the Void Dragon is actually beneath Mars in what's known as the Noctis Labyrinthus. And the Void Dragon, or at least a shard of it, was originally on Earth, and apparently the Emperor himself is the one who fought this version of the Void Dragon chained it and took it to Mars and buried it there. And it's very possible that, this Catan is responsible for the machine god, Mechanicum priesthood that took over Mars and gave us the Adeptus Mechanicus of modern era. It's possible that the Emperor did this on purpose, knowing that just by osmosis, the Void Dragon being, kind of a, just like how the Nightbringer is, your god that represents darkness and destruction, things like that, the Void Dragon seems to really depict, machine technology, like power over that sort of thing. Although the Eldar portrays this Catan as a figure of oblivion, wanton destruction, and devastation. But it seems to have a bit more of an effect on things than that, if the theory is that a part of it is underneath Mars and cause them to become a machine, worshipping offshoot of humanity, basically. And along these same lines, and distinctly with the Void Dragon specifically, apparently the Catan were losing pretty badly against the Old Ones in the War in Heaven in ancient times. And the Void Dragon was the one that helped devise the possibility of dividing real space from the warp, using those pylons that were found on Cadia and other worlds. So the Blackstone fortresses, the pylons, things like that, seem to have been directly from the Void Dragon's mastery over technology of that sort. And so, again, the Void Dragon kind of shows its power, not just raw power, but power in a sense of, being able to literally divide a dimension away from another dimension that is, as of now, intrinsically linked to each other. So, power over dimensions is a pretty powerful ability that we don't often see any beings have in this universe. And just to kind of bring the point home of how powerful the Void Dragon really is, apparently in the current era, a dynasty of the Necrons, known as the Arotep dynasty, was apparently attacked by a raging Catan shard of the Void Dragon. And it's stating that it's only a faint shadow of the Void Dragon's true power, but it still is able to basically destroy, a dozen Necron worlds until the dynasty was able to contain this shard of the Void Dragon. So, again, these entities just seem to be very powerful, and it takes a lot to contain them, just a bit of one of them. And then the only other evidence we have indicating that under Mars is the Void Dragon is late in the 41st millennium. 5 Necron light cruisers basically bypassed all the defenses in the Sol system, the Terran system, and landed near the Noctis Labyrinthus. And they were defeated by Mechanicum forces when they were there, and no one knows why they showed up there. And so them being drawn there seems to point again towards there being, if not the Void Dragon, something Necron related to everything having to do with the Mechanicus. And so maybe we'll learn more about that later, but as of right now it's just speculation. Alright, and now we're basically getting into the rest of them, and the rest of these there's not as nearly as much as those 3. Call it the Holy Trinity of Catan, those 3 that I just went over. They're the ones we know most about for the most part. The rest of these are a collection of names, essentially, and there's not too much more known about them. So, one of the other ones named is Lashudra, the Endless Swarm, and it just states that nothing is currently known about this Catan, other than that it exists. There is Kalugora, and Kalugora is considered a horrific engine of destruction. And of note, these shards are sometimes deployed by the Necrons basically as their version of a nuclear option. And this particular Catan Shard is not utilized by them, and it's imprisoned basically as containment in this case. So this one just seems distinctly dangerous, and not much else is known about it. Next is the Landugor, the Flayer, and this one is a distinct Catan. There's not too much about it, but this Catan, upon its destruction, was able to curse the Necrons, and basically gave a part of itself directly into the makeup of the Necrons. And from this spawned a madness that created the Flayed Ones. And if you don't know what Flayed Ones are, they're basically the nightmare fuel of the Necrons. They are obsessed with draping themselves in the flayed skins of their enemies. So they're a lot of fun to run into on the battlefield, or when they board your ship, or any other close quarters combat where they take their very sharp bladed fingers to you and then drape their skin over your skin over themselves as they scoot around. They are no fun. And so distinctly with this Catan, apparently there's no shards of it, and it was completely obliterated, which is distinct compared to a lot of these other ones. And it doesn't seem to be forthcoming on why this one was destroyed. I wonder if this one was way more feared than even the Nightbringer, because with the kind of destruction the Nightbringer wrought, you would think that they would have destroyed that one if they had the capability. So the exact means by which it was destroyed, maybe it was a one-off shot that they had with a certain technology they didn't have for the Nightbringer, but I just find it interesting they chose to destroy this one, if it was a choice at all. But judging by what it did to curse them at the end, I just wonder if it was just more dangerous in a lot of ways, and we just don't have as much information on it as we do the Nightbringer. Alright, so moving on, another name we have is Ogdriada, the Arisen, and just nothing known about that Catan. And then another one that is relatively known, but we don't really know much about this one. And this one has the most in common with Lovecraftian myths and stuff like that. This one is Saranoga, the Outsider, or Saranaga, or something like that. And due to its name, it is outside of the galaxy in a Dyson sphere, and it's basically imprisoned in a location beneath the galactic plane. And like unto the Nightbringer that had a lot of fun eating its brethren, the Outsider also was consuming other Catan, and due to doing that, it distinctly became insane. And again, it points to Kegorak, the laughing god of the Eldar, or Eldari, as the cause for why it was deceived to do that in the first place. And so this Catan distinctly, if you look upon it, instantly will strike you with terror, as well as possibly drive you insane. And apparently plenty of individuals and beings have chosen to exit the stage of life rather than face this being in person. And so how it got imprisoned in the Dyson sphere outside the galaxy, it's not distinctly brought up, but I imagine the Necrons are the ones responsible for that. I guess the old ones could have also been one of the people, one of the species possible for this too, but it's just simply not known. And actually, in terms of this Catan, it's speculated that it imposed its own exile out into this Dyson sphere for unknown reasons. For what reason it did that, we are not entirely sure. And apparently it's not distinctly as powerful as the Nightbringer, or smart as the Void Dragon, or deceitful like the Deceiver. It just distinctly says it's the most deadly and dangerous of the four main remaining Catan we know most about. to what degree and how specifically, we don't know. But apparently, if it comes back, it will be a very bad day for the galaxy indeed. And then one of the other distinct things about this Catan is that the Outsider is possibly the only Catan that not be sharded at all, like the other ones that Necrons got their hands on. So this might be the last remaining Catan that is fully put together, and if that's the case, it definitely could be one of the most powerful foes that the galaxy has to face that is not warp related or Tyranid related. But speaking of Tyranids, one of the oddest theories, this is an in-universe theory, and it's actually incorrect, but apparently the members of the Inquisition that specialize in Xenos threats seem to think that it's possible that the Outsider is the master of the Tyranids and made the Tyranids show up. If you're familiar with the Horus Heresy, you know that's not the case, unless that was somehow, well, maybe I'll take that back a little bit, because basically, if you don't know, the Tyranids were woken up by a blast from a machine known as the Pharaoh's machine on a planet during the Horus Heresy. And it was further investigated in the 41st millennium, and it was found that a shard of a different Catan was powering the Pharaoh's machine, making you, and if it was somehow in cahoots with the Outsider, maybe this is correct, but there's no real evidence other than speculation by the Inquisition on this. And other than perhaps maybe the Outsiders helping to entice the Tyranids being pulled into the galaxy. But again, pure speculation by an Inquisitor with in-world knowledge versus us knowing a bit more out-of-world knowledge as viewers into this world. And then last but not least, we have Granaya, the World Shaper. This one I briefly mentioned early on. This one could basically reshape planets how it pleased. And interestingly enough, this one actually semi-sided with the Imperium against some Necrons, which is unprecedented. So, very long story short, basically, a group of Necrons activated what was known as a world engine. Basically, imagine a very giant Death Star-like battle station. And about 15 elements of Space Marine chapters fought against this world engine. And one of the chapters, and this chapter actually basically died fighting on the world engine completely to a man, was the Astral Knights. One of their librarians, or their chief librarian, actually depicted in his mind, he was able to see that there was a Catan shard there raging against his bonds. And apparently, Granaya was able to communicate with these Marines and, offer a promise to destroy the world engine in return, letting it go free, and that it would leave the galaxy because, it didn't like this galaxy anymore. It wanted to go find species willing to worship it as a god and accept its gifts, basically. And it seemed to fulfill its promise. It destroyed the engine and did disappear. And we don't know where that shard went. And so if it did leave the galaxy, we do not know for sure. And then the only other depiction of this Catan was another shard was deployed against the Ultramarines in a fight against the Necron dynasty. And this particular Catan was much less communicative and did not ally with the Space Marines against the Necrons. However, when it was released, it did attack the Necrons as well as the Ultramarines. And Cato Sicarius, captain of the 2nd Company of Space Marines, was able to toss a vortex grenade at it and send it to the warp, which would effectively have destroyed this shard of this Catan. And so that's the final bit of information we have about the full list of Catan that we know exist. My personal speculation is that there are a lot of Catan that have not been seen, maybe just not in this galaxy. They seem to be a very common overall life form, and they're basically a distinct fabric of the universe itself. Like, basically, like, try to slay, like, the law of gravity as existing, you know? Like, that's kind of the Catan in a sense. So they're a very powerful, intrinsic part of the nature of the galaxy. They kind of feed into that, like, cold, unforgiving aspect of the universe when you look out and you see that, you know, dark abyss and the stars pinpricking in between the blackness. The Catan are kind of like that blackness in between the stars, you know, that unknowable coldness given form in reality as living, thinking beings. But anyway, that's your overview of the Catan or star gods. So as I brought up at the beginning of this video, shortly after this video goes live, I'm going to go live myself and continue playing the Necron campaign of Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. But more importantly than that, if you decide to stop by, it would just be an opportunity for us to just talk about Warhammer on a subject you'd like, on a video I've covered, any other topic you'd like to talk about. I'd love to get to know some of you there. So if you are watching this video on the same day it's posted, come on by and say hello. I will be live streaming pretty often, and I look forward to seeing you on a future one if you're seeing this in the far future instead of the day I posted it. But as always, like and subscribe if you like this. Leave a comment if you want to discuss anything from the video. And I appreciate your feedback and your comments and your time on my video and channel. We are getting pretty close to 1,000 subscribers, so if you haven't subscribed, please consider it. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and have a great weekend coming up here. Thanks, and have a great night.